I always believed that people in our school lived a special, almost parallel life. As soon as the bell rang after the last lesson, the usual balance of power instantly changed. The noisiest guys suddenly grew quieter than ever, while the quiet ones began, out of nowhere, to chat confidently in the corridors, as though waiting the whole day for that moment. It seemed to me that this shift occurred because, once we removed our official masks, we all tried to be ourselves for a while. And that was precisely when real interests, secret affections, and grudges, those rarely mentioned during the day, came to the surface. I never thought I would witness such a strange situation. One of my classmates would decide to spend every minute of his school life chasing after a girl who obstinately refused to even look at him. I'll recount it as I witnessed it with my own eyes, because it felt almost cinematic from the outside, full of bashful smiles, awkward slip-ups, and daily trials that would unnerve even the most ardent romantic heroes. I truly doubted anything like this could happen, but once it all began, I realized that reality sometimes extends far beyond the limits of our imagination. That day, we were standing in the school corridor, staring at the open doorway leading to the assembly hall. It was bitterly cold, winter refused to relinquish its grip, and everyone was bundled in thick sweaters. Snowbanks still lay outside, yet the teachers were already preparing us for spring events, such as the traditional Cosmonautics Day concert. I was fully immersed in the rehearsals for a small theatrical performance in which I had to read a few patriotic lines, waiting for the stage area to free up so we could continue practicing. Just then, my classmate, let's call him Kirill, though that's not his real name, suddenly appeared next to me. He was carrying an entire armful of textbooks and looked wildly anxious. Maybe it was the stress of the upcoming physics test that had everyone on edge or something else. I didn't know. But something about his demeanor immediately caught my attention. His eyes were ablaze, his lips pressed tightly together, and his legs trembled slightly, as though he was perched on the edge of a cliff, about to leap. I asked him if everything was all right. He just nodded and asked me to wait a few minutes, so he could speak to someone quickly. I didn't think much of it, assuming Kirill needed to track down a teacher to check one more time which sections to study for the test. But suddenly, he walked in the direction of the cloakroom area, where, around that time, a few girls from the parallel class usually gathered to talk about the latest gossip in school. Among them was Anya, a recognized beauty and top student, but with a rather challenging personality. People said she was cool, almost aloof, toward any show of affection, and sometimes acted like others' feelings had nothing to do with her. At the same time, she was known for achieving everything she set her mind to, entirely on her own, relying on her discipline and determination. Many guys were afraid to approach her, as if she alone possessed some coveted chest of treasure to which only chosen ones would be granted a key. When I saw Kirill heading toward Anya, I got a vague feeling that something unexpected would happen. Indeed, he stopped in front of her, placed his books on a windowsill to free his hands, and began to speak. I didn't catch every word, but I saw how Anya reluctantly broke away from chatting with her friend, gave Kirill a look, then slowly folded her arms across her chest. Her eyes seemed to say, "All right, then surprise me if you can." But from the way Kirill's lips quivered, I could tell he was struggling to find what he wanted to say. He seemed truly nervous, especially with Anya's girlfriends exchanging amused glances, nudging each other. After half a minute, Anya said something abrupt. Kirill shrank back, and then she flicked at her sweater sleeve, gave a slight toss of her head, and turned away. All I managed to catch was a short "not now." Kirill hung his head and quietly returned to the assembly hall entrance. No one who saw that scene tried to question him. The situation felt awkward, and Kirill looked completely undone. I could only guess what he had wanted to say to Anya and what might have driven him to act so strangely. But in that moment, I had no clue that this was just the beginning of a series of odd and even comical episodes that would soon become Kirill's daily routine. I couldn't have imagined that we stood at the threshold of an unending string of both humorous and painfully awkward moments, all revolving around his unstoppable desire to earn Anya's approval. The very next day, I saw Kirill as soon as class started. He was in the second row, a physics textbook open, but his eyes darted around the room as if searching for something or someone. I asked how he was and whether he might skip the upcoming concert rehearsals because of the looming physics test. He muttered something about, "It's all good. I'm just worried." And when the bell rang, he abruptly turned to me and mumbled as if to himself, "Will Anya be near the chemistry room at break today?" Startled me, he was apparently tracking her schedule in real time. I didn't dwell on it, just said I had no idea, that I didn't share chemistry class with her, and that I had to be in the assembly hall to rehearse. He nodded, shot a dark glance at the blackboard, and opened his notebook. During the test, I noticed Kirill glancing repeatedly at his watch, even though the teacher had strictly forbidden any distractions. Once class ended, he dashed out as if propelled by a spring, nearly colliding with an older student in the doorway. I also hurried out, heading for the assembly hall to talk with the teacher in charge about a schedule change. But as I passed the long corridor, I noticed Kirill standing near the chemistry room. A small crowd had formed. Some students waited to talk to the teacher. Others rushed in or out to grab books. Kirill stood there, gripping his backpack strap, his expression radiating that he had to be right there. Right then, suddenly I spotted Anya coming around the corner with a friend, chatting animatedly, evidently in a good mood. On seeing Kirill, she paused slightly, as though deciding whether to ignore him, but he walked determinedly toward her. I couldn't hear the conversation, but in a flash, Anya made a dismissive hand gesture that clearly said, "Enough, leave me alone." She didn't look furious, only mildly annoyed. She turned on her heel, her friend smirked, and they both walked off. Kirill stood frozen, hands still gripping the backpack strap, as though it were the only thing keeping him steady. I approached him to ask if he was okay, but he just coughed and forced out, "She said, she's not interested right now." That was all he explained before sighing helplessly and drifting off to our next classroom, where a lesson was likely underway. After a few days, I realized Kirill was using every single break specifically to bump into Anya. He would estimate where she'd be, find an excuse to go there, and come away empty-handed each time. My friends and I began to chuckle at the situation, not trying to hurt him, but just because it looked so absurd, like a scene from a teenage romantic comedy. The hero repeatedly landing in humiliating circumstances, the heroine rolling her eyes and walking on. Meanwhile, Anya had developed her own vigilant posture. The second Kirill showed up in view, she would shift direction or send her friends out as shields, so that he'd have no chance to approach. But Kirill was very persistent. It started to feel like nothing would make him stop. Once, I asked him outright, "Why do you keep doing this if she's turning you down over and over?" We were sitting in the cafeteria. He was barely touching his soup, which had gone cold. He answered something like, "I can't really explain, but I feel that if I don't try, I'll miss my chance. I just need her to hear me out properly once." His voice trembled, making it clear he was fighting an inner battle. I really didn't know how to respond. Yes, occasionally someone in our school would chase after a girl, bring flowers, write notes. But day in, day out, turning the breaks into a clandestine pursuit was extraordinary. I was beginning to worry about him. Within a week, the whole school had started buzzing with gossip about Kirill's strange love stalking, as some called it. Though stalking might be too strong a term, he wasn't doing anything dangerous or crossing serious lines. He was just repeatedly attempting to talk to Anya, give her compliments, or escort her to class. His determination had reached a level where he tuned out the fact that she continually ignored or rejected him. Earlier, she'd simply brushed him off, but now she sometimes pointedly told him, in front of everyone, "Aren't you tired of this yet?" Or, "How long are you going to keep following me?" Kirill would turn crimson, lower his head, but remain in place until Anya's friends led her away. It all seemed totally hopeless, but I also saw that Kirill had a strange cocktail of stubbornness and possibly genuine feeling, which he couldn't handle. It was as though he simply refused to believe he was unwelcome. He maintained that if he just pushed harder, eventually Anya would give him the chance to explain, or to show he wasn't some nuisance. I felt a kind of sympathy. At times, I wanted to speak to Anya on his behalf, to tell her Kirill wasn't as foolish as she might think. But I realized that might only make things worse. She might start avoiding me, too, convinced I was in league with him. Paradoxically, This drama also made me and Kirill somewhat closer friends. We started talking more often, and sometimes he'd hint at his plans or ask me to come along as moral support when he tried to speak to Anya. Torn between pity for his plight and a desire not to meddle, I sometimes walked with him, lingering at a distance. But each time, the scene repeated. Anya gave him that familiar, chilly stare, said something that set a firm boundary, and left. She didn't seem cruel exactly, just uninterested. In my view, she simply didn't want his attention and tried to show that as clearly as possible. All the same, the more times she said no, the more Kirill seemed desperate to turn it into a yes. That worried me. It was as though he simply refused to register her words, believing that no meant not yet. He thought she just didn't grasp yet how terrific he was and that if she only looked deeper, she would change her mind. But Anya gave no sign she wanted to look deeper. She was busy with her daily life. She studied, took extracurricular lessons, hung out with friends, and, from what I heard, even started taking some special courses outside school. She had no time for repeated attempts at conversation. Every time she saw him pop up by a door, her face showed not anger but weariness, as if saying, "Why won't you stop?" Eventually, some of the more mischievous guys in our year, those who loved to tease any vulnerability, began provoking him, saying things like, "Prove you're worthy," "Give her flowers in front of everyone," or "Bet you won't confess in public." Kirill took it as a challenge, and one Friday, during the longest break of the day, he truly showed up in the entrance hall carrying a bouquet of flowers. The tension was immense. Students gathered around to watch something dramatic, while I shrank back, wishing I could vanish. Anya, a teacher leaving the classroom, and even a few parents on school business were all present to see Kirill standing there with a huge bunch of bright red tulips. I had no idea how he'd even found tulips in winter. When Anya entered the hall, her gaze swept over the crowd and immediately lit on Kirill. She halted for a moment, seemingly realizing something big was about to happen. Kirill, as if summoning his last shred of courage, stretched out the bouquet and blurted, "Anya, I'm sorry for distracting you all the time, but I can't. I just can't stand by." His voice trembled. He was clearly terrified, but he held the flowers out anyway. In some storybooks, such a gesture might make the heroine's heart melt. But Anya walked over, fixed him with her cool eyes, and said calmly, "I won't accept your flowers because I didn't want them, and I asked you to leave me alone. Don't you listen." You could have heard a pin drop in that hallway. Kirill's hands began to shake. His face was as red as the tulips. Anya didn't bother drawing it out further. She turned and walked away. A few upperclassmen started clapping, apparently impressed by her steeliness, while some girls whispered that it was too harsh. Kirill stood dumbly in the middle of the hall. I assumed this public humiliation would put an end to everything. Hardly anyone can keep going after being rejected so publicly. But to my astonishment, Kirill gazed a moment at the spot where Anya had disappeared, then bit his lip, tossed the bouquet in a nearby trash can, and rushed away down the corridor. I watched him leave, unsure whether to follow, but decided maybe it was best to let him process alone. Still, Kirill refused to stop. He seemed driven by something inside him that insisted he must keep trying. Later that evening, he sent me a short message, "I won't give up." I felt uneasy, realizing that his determination had edged into obsession. The saddest part was that Anya showed no sign of wanting him around. She was the one who clearly didn't want any involvement. Yet Kirill took each rejection as a temporary obstacle that courage or persistence could fix. It took all my willpower not to scold him bluntly. I feared losing our friendship if I pointed out how bad things had gotten. But I also saw that my silence was enabling him to dig himself deeper. It wasn't long before he reached a real dead end. That same week, our school had a cleaning day, when we didn't have lessons, instead tidying classrooms, washing windows, wiping desks, organizing shelves. Kirill and I were assigned to clear out old props from the assembly hall storeroom, dragging dusty boxes into the corridor, so we could sort out what might still be useful. I was focused on the work, but soon realized Kirill had vanished. The teacher said he'd bolted the moment he heard that Anya was cleaning the literature classroom, grabbing a rag and rushing off there, pretending he absolutely needed to wipe down desks. Soon enough, rumors spread that another scene had happened. Kirill hovered around Anya, offering to help, trying to talk, until she finally snapped, telling him bluntly how fed up she was and to leave her alone. Reportedly, several classmates were present, and some tried to calm Anya down. Kirill supposedly looked like someone had thrown a bucket of ice water at him. He left without a word and apparently hid somewhere in the building, trying to pull himself together. I found him near the gym, sitting on a bench, staring at the wall. Tears were rolling down his cheeks, and he made no effort to brush them away. I approached and asked what happened. Kirill mumbled, "She doesn't want to see me. She just doesn't understand me." At that point, I couldn't hold back. I told him he'd brought this on himself, that Anya had made her feelings plain enough, but he was determined to act as if it was a misunderstanding that would eventually resolve itself. I wasn't sure if I sounded too harsh, but I believed he needed the unvarnished truth. Kirill listened with clenched fists, not interrupting. Once I'd finished, he wiped his face with his sleeve and said wearily, I don't get why it hurts so much. I thought if you worked hard enough, eventually people would appreciate you." I didn't know what to say. How do you explain that love and affection aren't the result of effort or doggedness, but something more subtle that requires real reciprocation? If there's zero interest on the other side, no amount of trying will help. Observing Kirill, I felt it was a textbook example of how stubbornness can blind a person, turning a simple teenage crush into a painful chase. I patted him on the shoulder, urging him to let go and stop tormenting both himself and Anya. He nodded, but I could see he was far from fully accepting that. Next day at school, everything continued as usual. Anya stuck to her own routine, ignoring Kirill completely, while Kirill wandered the corridors looking miserable, seemingly deflated. It was as though his dream had been shattered beyond repair. At the same time, I sensed that a tiny spark of hope still lingered in his mind. Maybe, just maybe, there's some angle I haven't tried. That last shred of hope seemed to keep him from giving up fully. I knew the final act of the story probably hadn't played out yet. Over the following days, I tried more than once to figure out Kirill's frame of mind, but he wouldn't open up. We shared a desk in math, solving questions. He kept looking outside, answering in monosyllables, lacking the old spark. It felt like he was burned out, his only concern to avoid any run-in with Anya or hearing her sharp retorts. For a moment, I naively thought, he's finally done. Maybe he truly accepted reality. But about 3 days later, a new twist confirmed that Kirill still believed he had some part to play in a game where the prize was Anya's favor, and he wasn't ready to leave the board. It happened in the cafeteria. A few of us were talking about an upcoming school quest. Each spring, the school organizes a day-long event with stations spread across the campus, where teams solve puzzles and challenges. Kirill was only half listening, until he heard that Anya had signed up with her parallel class to participate. Immediately, he wanted to know exactly which day it would be, which areas would be used, which tasks were inside, which were outside. I realized he had a plan. Use the general chaos of the event to accidentally cross paths with Anya and once again try to talk. I expressed doubt, feeling any approach to her was doomed, but Kirill refused to see it that way. When the day arrived, it was intense. The entire school was split into teams, each with a designated route and tasks. Kirill and I ended up on the same team. We rushed through the hallways, collecting clues, but Kirill was constantly peeking around, asking, "Where's Anya's team now? Which station are they on?" I kept reminding him, "Focus on our team's objectives, man," but he seemed determined to do both. beat the quest and encounter Anya. Perhaps he thought that if we beat her team, she'd be impressed. Reality had different plans. Midway through the game, on the third floor, we bumped right into Anya's team. They were heading for the next station, and we just finished ours. Kirill spotted her and, forgetting everything, intercepted her. Anya, wait just a second. She was in a hurry. Her teammates called, "Come on!" But Kirill stepped directly into her path, all while the hallway was crowded with participants, teachers, random onlookers. Anya scowled, saying something like, "Get out of the way, we have a quest to do." But Kirill didn't budge, apparently set on some dramatic statement. Then Anya, clearly at the end of her rope, spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Will you leave me alone already? How many times do I have to tell you?" A hush fell. I felt goosebumps. Kirill froze, jaw trembling. Anya glared and added, "I don't want anything to do with you. Got it? We're completely different people and I do not like you at all. Now move." She edged past him and her group hurried on. I expected Kirill to crumble then and there. Such a public rejection, in front of so many, must have been devastating. He stood in the corridor as though stricken by lightning, arms limp, face twisted in hurt and embarrassment. My heart ached for him, but at the same time, I knew he had basically forced the situation. People started whispering. Kirill seemed to fade back against the wall. I told him quietly, "Come on, we still have stations to do." But he shook his head. He wanted to be alone. So I moved on with our teammates, while Kirill never showed up at the finish line. We lost the quest, and I later learned he'd just disappeared for the rest of the day. From that point, Anya acted as if Kirill no longer existed. If before she'd been politely distant, now she gave him zero acknowledgement, and her friends made sure he kept away. Kirill, for his part, truly seemed done. He'd once responded to setbacks by doubling his efforts. Now it looked like the flame had gone out. He wandered around looking like a ghost, occasionally casting longing glances from afar but never trying to approach. Classmates gossiped about how harsh Anya's words had sounded, though many said Kirill had brought it all on himself. Spring progressed. Outside, the snow melted. In the courtyard, puddles formed. In the corridors, excitement for the coming summer break grew. But for Kirill, it wasn't spring at all. He seemed stuck in a season of dissolution, as all his hopes and energies dissipated. I tried to cheer him up, suggesting we hang out after school, see a movie, but he demurred. Occasionally, I saw him typing messages to Anya on social media, presumably more apologies or attempts to explain. She had blocked him. It was obvious to everyone. He needed to let it go. But habit or obsession made him cling to the remnants. Eventually, I decided to have a serious talk. After class, I sat with him near the lockers and said, "Kirill, look, you have to see that this is pointless. She's made it so clear that she doesn't feel anything for you. You can't force her to. How much longer do you plan to keep this up?" He stayed silent for a moment, then let out a resigned sigh. "I know. I must be a fool, but I was so afraid of missing my shot that I ended up just making everything worse. I thought if you kept knocking, eventually the door would open. But I never considered that maybe they don't want to open it." I gave a sad little grin. "Exactly. She's got her own life. She's busy, and your attempts at big gestures just aren't working for her. That doesn't mean you're worthless, but you can't keep pushing." Kirill nodded and said he would really try to stop haunting her, to back off. He admitted he'd believed no meant not yet, but realized now it had always been a firm no from day one. We hugged, and I saw the weight lift slightly from his shoulders. Then he broke into quiet tears, and I realized how badly he'd been hurting. Caught in a self-made illusion, I consoled him by saying time would heal, and eventually he might look back on all this with a smile. In school, everything feels bigger than it is. Every glance or word can seem earth-shattering. Over time, you learn rejections come with life, and they don't define your worth. From then on, Kirill truly did quit chasing Anya. In class, he refocused on studying, and during breaks, he avoided crossing her path. If they occasionally glimpsed each other, he'd just lower his gaze and walk on. Sometimes I saw her watch him warily, as though braced for another approach, but he never tried. It was as though he'd entered a parallel dimension, one without that old obsession. He definitely needed time to recover emotionally, but at least he was no longer banging his head against a brick wall. Watching the final chapter of this strange saga was a relief, though it taught me some serious lessons. 1. Sometimes you just have to accept no and stop knocking on a closed door, or you hurt both yourself and the other person. 2. Never let an infatuation morph into a stubborn quest to win someone, because real feelings can't be forced. 3. If affection isn't mutual, you risk turning your love story into a source of anguish. So ended the story of the boy who was always chasing a girl in school while she steadily turned him away. At times it felt like we were stuck in a loop, each day the same pattern. His dogged persistence, her rejection. Eventually the loop ended and real life continued. In the following weeks, Kirill acted like he was recovering from a serious illness. He stopped trying to publicly prove his feelings, paused, looked around, and saw that life wasn't solely about Anya. He started joking with our group again, discussing new films, and participating in concert rehearsals with more genuine involvement. Sometimes I noticed him watching Anya walk past, but there was no longer desperation in his eyes, only a subdued sadness, maybe a small regret, a sense of, could things have gone differently? Yet in all honesty, I'd suspected from the start that he and Anya weren't suited for each other, and he just refused to see it. One day in late May, Kirill confided that he wanted to try something fresh, like joining a music course to learn guitar. Before, he'd been so obsessed with Anya that he'd had no time or energy for anything else. Now, with that energy freed, he was discovering new pursuits. I told him it was a good sign, like a door opening for something better. Maybe he'd meet new people, someone who was genuinely happy to have his attention. We even joked that if he became a great guitarist, he might have a new circle of admirers. Finally, the end of the school year arrived, and we put on our big performance. I recited my patriotic lines about space exploration, while Kirill had a small role in another act, doing it dutifully if not passionately. Anya also performed, but in a different segment. They briefly crossed paths backstage, and I saw Kirill offer her a polite smile. She gave a slight nod and moved on with her own tasks. Perhaps that was their calmest interaction. No more attempts at forced conversation, no illusions. Felt like a quiet coda to the story. After final grades were in and we went our separate ways for the summer break, the school fell silent. Kirill left to spend time at his grandmother's in the countryside. He occasionally sent me pictures. Bright sunshine, chores in a garden, a relaxed smile on his face. I was happy for him. He was at last directing his energies to something other than this single-minded pursuit of Anya. Maybe thoughts of her stung from time to time, but as with most things, distance softened it. September arrived, and when we reconvened, Kirill seemed somewhat rejuvenated and more mature. He greeted Anya calmly when they were briefly in the same group, and though she remained indifferent, Kirill accepted it without any sign of hurt. He mentioned wanting to focus on the future, possibly preparing for entrance exams. I felt relief, like he'd learned to be more measured in his approach to feelings. That fall, new concerns took center stage. Older students prepared for finals, some traveled to competitions, others practiced for sports. Rumors about Kirill's pursuit of Anya faded. There was nothing else to discuss. Now, if I remembered it, it was with a sense that no passion alone could bend the reality that love is a dialogue between two people. Without reciprocity, it's just one person talking to an empty room. Reflecting on it, I realize how it influenced me. I learned about respecting others' feelings, about not rushing to judge or meddle, about supporting a friend who might be going astray but letting him make his own choices. We all pick up these lessons during our school years, though we don't always recognize them at the time. Adults sometimes laugh off teenage dramas as trifles, but I think it's in such trials that we forge our basic approach to loving, befriending, and, yes, letting go. Kirill's story exemplified that you can't force yourself on someone, no matter how fervent you are. You have to truly see and hear the person you like. Otherwise, any heroic gesture of love becomes a naive chase that leaves both sides exhausted. I don't know what became of Kirill later. Perhaps he found someone who welcomed his sincerity, or maybe Anya discovered some changed side of him, though I doubt it. First impressions often run deep. But by then, it no longer mattered. Both of them took their own paths. Maybe, years later, they'd glance at each other from across a room and smile, recalling how intense a simple school crush can be. For me, I simply recorded it in my memory, as I witnessed it. Sometimes it sounded sad, sometimes funny, sometimes like a lesson. But it was definitely about growing up and accepting that if there's no reciprocity, the best thing is to stop chasing and give each other freedom. Years went by. On social media, I occasionally see old classmates, and Kirill and Anya never appear in each other's friend lists or photos. They just quietly live their own lives, a normal outcome. The entire affair is in the past, like so many teenage heartbreaks. Once in a while, I run into Kirill in the city. We'll sit in a coffee shop, swap news, reminisce. He'll mention finishing his music course or share career plans, and mention he has a girlfriend now who truly gets him. He doesn't elaborate, but I see in him a calm glow. Gone is the anxious flame in his eyes. I'm honestly glad for him. I've bumped into Anya maybe once or twice at big community events. She's still the somewhat distant, self-sufficient person I remember. Probably living a life with little time for those who don't fit her plans, and that's perfectly fine. In any case, the time when Kirill trailed her through the corridors is just a faint memory, fading more each day. If I had to summarize the entire story in one line, it's this: never let your feelings become a chase, because without reciprocity there's no true bond. But in school, we often hear slogans like, fight for your love, never surrender, which might teach perseverance but rarely mention the other person's right to say no. That's probably why so many teenage stories revolve around someone chasing someone else who's constantly running away. It's only later we realize love is a two-way movement, not a frantic attempt to catch a departing train. For me, Kirill's experience hammered home that you can't make anyone love you by sheer force of will. If the person says no, you need to accept it no matter how painful. Eventually, pain recedes, and somewhere out there, there's likely someone who will gladly walk by your side. I hope Kirill learned that, as did many who witnessed the drama. If someone else ever faces a similar test, maybe they'll recall this cautionary tale. That sometimes a door simply won't open, no matter how hard you knock. So the story ended and we all moved on. Once we graduated, everyone scattered down their individual paths. Occasionally I recall the sight of Kirill in the hallway, holding a bouquet with absolute conviction that a small miracle was imminent. I used to pity him for not getting the miracle he wanted. Then I realized the real miracle was inside him. He grew, discovered boundaries, and stopped forcing his way through closed doors. I share this now, hoping it might resonate with anyone who's ever been Kirill or Anya, or a bystander like me. Maybe these experiences shape how we see ourselves, how we view others, and how we deal with naive feelings when we fail to read the signals. That's not shameful, we're all human, we make mistakes, we learn. In the end, the best part is that if I see Kirill tomorrow, he might tell me about new projects, mention a hobby or show me pictures with his band, and we'll laugh at those frantic hallway pursuits of old. Then we'll shake hands or hug, carrying the knowledge that it was just one chapter in our journey toward adulthood. That's the hopeful side. No matter how old we get or how intense our feelings once were, life goes on, offering new doors we can open with the right keys. Sometimes, on an autumn evening, I flip through old school photos and a wave of nostalgia sweeps me away. I recall Kirill's tense face, burning with determination yet shadowed by each rejection. I guess that's how youth often is. Everything is magnified, every emotion feels like it could shatter worlds, and we see every obstacle as temporary. But reality is tougher. Not every obstacle can be overcome. Sometimes it's a sign that the path is closed. Accepting that requires a courage we only gain with time. For me, the most crucial lesson from this episode is that we don't always get what we want so badly, and that's okay. A rejection doesn't mean we're worthless or that our life is over. Sometimes it merely means we're on the wrong path. If we pivot sooner, we might find people and opportunities better aligned with us. Kirill needed a while to grasp that and nearly destroyed himself in the process, but he pulled through and hopefully found healthier ways of relating to others. As for Anya, she lived her life on her terms, which is her unquestionable right. Had someone filmed the entire story from start to finish, it might have looked like a peculiar teenage miniseries. The hero trails the heroine rejects him, and only in the finale does he realize it's futile, so the story ends. But of course, real life is more complicated than that. We're not stock characters, and our emotions don't follow a neat script. Things happened as they did, and looking back, it feels inevitable, given that Anya never showed any interest. When I hear people say, fight for love, I always think of Kirill and his endless quest to break through Anya's indifference. Then I want to add that we must also respect the other person's freedom. There's nothing wrong with persistence in itself, but if someone says no, we need to accept it rather than keep pushing. Otherwise, we risk going through the same painful journey Kirill endured. Some might need that lesson for personal growth, but I think most would do better learning it early on, sparing themselves needless heartbreak. Now that our school days lie behind us and our lives revolve around new responsibilities, university, jobs, different cities, we hardly talk about those corridors anymore. But to me, Kirill's story is more than just a bit of teenage gossip. It stands for the mistakes, illusions, and awakenings we carry into our futures. Maybe those very mistakes make us more compassionate down the road. Watching how friends and acquaintances navigate relationships now, some forming couples, some breaking up, I notice they usually handle rejections more gracefully. Often, they understand repeated pleadings won't turn a no into a yes. Not everyone, but many do. I suspect that's the result of lessons learned from experiences like Kirill's. Maybe Kirill himself, when advising a younger cousin or friend, says, "Don't do what I did," or at least he no longer repeats the pattern. Hence, Kirill and Anya's story doesn't end in fairy tale bliss or in tragedy, but in a real-life lesson that sometimes letting go is better than clinging on. I witnessed the entire arc, and it's among my strongest memories of school. Let it be a reminder. Respect the other person's wishes if you want yours respected. 2. Yes, it may sound like a cliché, but these simple truths are often the hardest to learn. Which brings us to the close of this tale, exactly where it was meant to end, with the realization that the best move for someone left unrequited is to stop the pointless chase, granting freedom to both sides. I saw it all happen, felt the tension, and now retell it as best I can, both observer and minor participant in a story that was sometimes touching, sometimes exasperating, but ultimately about growing up. Every so often, someone asks me how to behave if they fall in love without reciprocation. Part of me wants to say, just talk to the person, confess your feelings, but if they're not interested, don't torment yourself for them. Yet in reality, many do exactly what Kirill did, cling to a desperate hope, imagining that if they just persist, some miracle will occur. Maybe that's the legacy of fairy tales, where the hero never quits until he wins the princess and half the kingdom. Only in real life do we learn that the princess might have her own plans, leaving no room for us, and no grand gesture will sway her if her heart is elsewhere. I've also had crushes that weren't returned. But after seeing Kirill's ordeal, I understood how critical it is not to overstep the line where your love becomes a burden for the other. Yes, show your interest, but if the other person's signals are clearly negative, don't turn it into a siege. We're not medieval knights. We're modern people, each with the right to say no. Revisiting all these events in my mind, I see how cohesive yet open-ended the story is. Everyone who hears it can find their own perspective. Maybe they were Kirill once, or Anya, or the friend caught in the middle. And I believe that's how these teenage dramas quietly teach us so much. If I hadn't seen Kirill's heartbreak, perhaps I'd have repeated the same mistake somewhere else. Now, at least I know what a painful dead end it can be. So now, writing it all out with just a touch of nostalgia and gratitude for the lessons it taught me, I can even smile at how we once sat on that bench. Kirill still convinced Anya would come around, me trying to explain love can't be forced. It was a real lesson in honesty and empathy. Kirill opened his heart to me. I did what I could to stand by him. No, it's not a triumphant love story ending in mutual confessions, but a small tragedy. A typical adolescent stumble when one refuses to accept no. But also a story of growing up, of learning that one-sided longing yields only more pain. And at the same time, it's about how even the hardest times can shape us for the better, making us stronger and freer. That's my account. I hope it captures something of the school atmosphere, where corridors host intense emotions, and desks quietly witness our first struggles and triumphs. May anyone who reads these lines discover a piece of themselves here. All I did was share what I saw, and how I felt, as both an observer and a slightly involved party in this emotional, complicated story.